Why so serious?
Why so serious?
Okay. Joker is one of the most important films of the 21st century. I recognize that opening this video up the same way as my falling down analysis certainly puts this film on a bit of a pedestal. If nothing else, it gives it a certain expectation, so let me dispel some immediate questions. No, this film is nowhere near as good as either of the films I've talked about so far. No, this film isn't important in the same ways as those films. No, I'm not the sort of person who thinks this film is to blame for the epidemic of lonely 20-something men who harass women on Twitter and think the woke left is summoning the ruination of the West. I don't blame the catalyst for starting the fire. I blame the man holding the match. But I'm not making a video about such people today. I'm making a video about the film that could have stood among the greats, if only it knew what it wanted to be. Joker is in equal parts a character study of the most complex variety accessible to the average filmgoer, a teardown of the American system, and a shining example of why comic book movies as they have become need to stay in their lane, or preferably be left behind as a relic of the 2010s nostalgia market. But first, as always, the synopsis. Joker follows Arthur Fleck, a mentally ill man struggling to survive day-to-day in Gotham City, aka Detroit. His support system is thin, limited to his aging mother, his social worker who's eventually laid off due to cuts on social services, one man at his job who's nice to him, and a charismatic talk show host who Arthur sees as a father figure. His job as a clown for hire is put into jeopardy by his shady co-workers, his dismissive boss, and his own unfortunate ineptitude. Eventually, he's fired, and on that same night, he winds up murdering 3 trust fund kids in self-defense. Well, 2 in self-defense. Maybe only 1. After this, he begins suffering from larger and larger delusions, not helped by going off his meds and his mother's influence on his actions. He winds up seeking out Thomas Wayne, candidate for governor, under the impression that he is a product of a secret relationship between Wayne and Fleck's mother. Wayne firmly denies this, and Arthur later learns that, in fact, his mother has been in a constant state of denial ever since she was fired and subjected to extreme abuse from her then-boyfriend. Oh, and he's adopted. Also, the talk show guy made fun of him on air. Things aren't going well for him, let's say. Arthur becomes more and more violent as his fragile life collapses around him. With his support system effectively gone, partially his own fault since he kills his mom after he finds out that he's adopted, Arthur resolves to shoot himself on live television after the Murray Franklin show extends him an offer to guest star on an episode. The night Arthur goes on, he requests that he be introduced as a clown named Joker, after Murray Franklin called him that on the show. That same night, a series of protests spurred on by Wayne's dismissive attitude towards Gotham's destitute has reached a boiling point. They finally climax as Arthur reveals that he killed the 3 trust fund kids on television and subsequently shoots Murray Franklin. He's taken into custody, now firmly cemented within his Joker identity. There's a lot to unpack here, and I don't want to go straight into bashing the film for failing to be great. Instead, I'll give some quick kudos to the production team for being able to work with and around what sounds like one of the most eclectic shoots that they'll probably ever do. I assume that was edited post.
Yeah.
I hope to God it was. I believe he'd do it is the thing. Joaquin Phoenix's performance in this movie has become well known for how much of it was improvised on set. And obviously he also gets props for just being a great actor, but the crew who had to accommodate for that are at least on the same level. Some scenes I want to highlight are the bathroom dance and the fridge scene, both of which were greatly enhanced by cinematographer Lawrence Sher and camera operator Jeff Haley keeping up with Phoenix's movements. For the lead up to Arthur killing the subway dudes, stunt coordinator George Aguilar and 3 actors alongside Phoenix adapted to him improvising kicks back at his attackers. There's also Randall's death, where again Aguilar and the stunt double managed to keep things held together when Phoenix went completely off script and not only stabbed Randall twice, but added in a head bashing on top of that. As much as actors like Phoenix get recognition from filmgoers about their choices on set, those choices don't mean squat without a fantastic production team to capture them. I think it's important that those people get their recognition too. Keeping with the positivity, I'd like to discuss how the film represents and explores the character that is Arthur Fleck, because I think there was some serious potential here to create a character who could be talked about in the same sentences as Travis Bickle or Defense, well, at least under a different context than he has been discussed. That context being how much Joker lifts from its acclaimed forecomers. As I mentioned in the Falling Down video, I classify Joker as a Society Man film, and no, it's not just because of the meme, it's only partly because of it. I define a Society Man film as a story which follows a man on the lower rungs of the social ladder. Time is spent establishing his downtrodden nature and lifestyle, and he is spurred into action by his dissatisfaction with the way the world treats him. Mind, him is the operative word there. A Society Man isn't a working-class hero. He's a self-centered scumbag who's too destroyed by the system to realize he isn't suffering alone. Eventually, though, the Society Man meets a girl who makes things a bit better, but for one reason or another, they don't work out. Most often, this is due to the Society Man's own failings as a person. The film ends on a climax which, while perhaps explosive and lethal, is revealed in the end to have been almost entirely pointless, in the grand scheme of things, at least. Despite directing his aggression at the system, at least in his own mind, the Society Man creates no large-scale change and ends where he began, suffering alone. Barring minor deviations, this formula is applicable to most films of this variety. Joker is no different, and that's to its detriment. In having fewer deviations from this established formula, the film looks all the more derivative of its elders which established that formula. On the Taxi Driver front especially, the film can visually look very similar. The inner city setting with a heavy emphasis on streets and transit gives it that impression, as well as a large number of scenes which see Arthur alone in his apartment stewing on his life. Robert De Niro's casting is also a big tell of where this film's coming from, but even more than Taxi Driver is the film King of Comedy, which sees De Niro playing a recluse who LARPs as a talk show host in his basement, and eventually kidnaps a host he frequently listens to. I haven't seen this movie yet, but as I understand it, this one is more thematically linked to Joker, not to mention the Murray Franklin subplot being an obvious allusion to that film. If not a straight-up ripoff, but I'd like to give the film the benefit of the doubt in that regard. However, I'd say Joker differs from Taxi Driver, if not both of those films, in how it utilizes its unreliable narrator. Hopefully. Again, I haven't seen King of Comedy, so it may be that this film is very similar to it in that regard also. But anyway, the very final moments of Taxi Driver suggest similar things about Travis Bickle, but where in that film I think it undercuts the story it was trying to tell, I believe Joker uses it to a much better effect for the most part. It becomes obvious throughout the film that Arthur fades in and out of reality, and certain subplots occur entirely in his head. Seeing and recognizing these delusions adds an extra dimension to Arthur's character, as we get to see both how cracked and damaged his psyche is, and how desperately in need of approval he is. Now's as good a time as any to start talking about the man himself. He's what sets this film apart from its aforementioned inspirations the most, as I'd call Arthur one of the most complex characters I've seen in a mainstream film, certainly in a comic book film. Being a protagonist in a film like this, you'd probably expect him to be either a completely infallible good guy forced into villainy, or a secret fucked up maniac who's just hiding beneath an unassuming surface. I'm happy to say that Arthur is, in fact, a seriously flawed man who does his best to get by. The film reinforces how he was essentially raised to bring happiness to people around him, which of course influenced his career path, but it also shows itself in other scenes where he interacts with people around him in a neutral space. He's full of empathy for friends, family, and strangers alike. The first instance of violence committed by him only comes around because of his inability to contain his frustration at seeing a random woman being harassed on the subway. The only time he really lets his guard down and acts outright negative is with his social worker, but even then he doesn't just resort to edgy platitudes about how no one cares about him and he's the only sane man in a world gone mad. He's straightforward and blunt about his feelings and his needs, mainly about his meds. That's one thing that I'm especially happy about with Arthur's depiction. Rarely does it feel like they lean into cliched and uninformed depictions of mental illness.
And have you thought?
No. Give me money.
We really needed that. Yeah, he was locked up. I didn't think he was in the drunk tank.
I prefer to call it a think tank.
The operative word being rarely. They do sometimes. But honestly, I expected it to be way worse than it is. And I think that that's something worth commending. Especially for when it came out. Cough, cough, split, cough. The film isn't trying to say that the mentally ill are one bad day away from going Joker mode. Quite to the contrary. It's clear throughout the film that all Arthur wants is to make it to the next day and make the people around him and the people he cares about happy. And efforts are made to depict his mental illness in a grounded way, if not a particularly realistic way. He carries a card to inform people of his condition when he's unable to communicate, and said condition isn't something as hyperbolic as murderous thoughts or a split personality. It's an uncontrollable, abnormal reaction to emotional stimuli. It's a tic. It's just a different shade of cuteness aggression at the end of the day. Hell, I've dealt with something similar to it in several moments of my life, not to the extent that Arthur does, but still, it's especially clear to me that he doesn't just laugh because he's the Joker, even if it does seem that way on the surface. What's also important is that he doesn't like it, and he actively tries to suppress that tic every time it comes out. His excessive smoking habit even renders it to the point that it actively hurts him, and yet people think that this hollow, strained cackle is him expressing joy, just because it's a laugh. Even so, Arthur makes it clear with his own words that his laughter doesn't mean he's happy. Only later in the film does he embrace that laughter, and it's a mixture of a coping mechanism and newfound sociopathic tendencies. His laughter isn't treated like a flaw, it's just a fact of his existence that he has to deal with. What is a flaw, on the other hand, is his failure to respect others' boundaries, which itself is a symptom of a sense of entitlement that becomes more and more obvious as the film progresses. Obviously, this is seen in his stalking the woman he talks to on the elevator, but he also tends to assume that whatever he's feeling, or whatever he feels like doing in any given moment, people will just go along with. This gets him into trouble later on when he tries getting close with Thomas Wayne's son, and he lashes out at a random, unnamed butler who shuts down his efforts. When he finally does confront Wayne, his actions and words suggest that he feels owed a father figure, more than just wanting one.
We are not brothers.
But you just said you're my brother.
Why don't you give me a fucking hug, brother? A little fucking decency. This is despite everyone in his life trying to explain to him that his mother is delusional, but he refuses to accept reality until it's forced down his throat. Also obvious is that one part during the Murray Franklin show, but by that point he's fully stopped caring about other people. Not that that excuses SA, obviously, but still, he wouldn't have gone for that earlier in the film. It's clear that by this point he's given up on trying to be a good person, and he gives in to the most extreme delusions and impulsive thoughts. He becomes fully self-centered. All of these things put together, we can get pretty close to a potential diagnosis for Arthur. The film gives an accurate one for his mother later on, so I believe that his character was written and acted with a specific set of conditions in mind. Chief among them is autism. I feel pretty confident saying that. This is suggested by Arthur's inability to read social cues and situations, his being literally me, and his heightened and lowered empathy at different moments in the film. Granted, the lowered empathy could be a sign of antisocial or sociopathic traits, but this only comes about as he slips further and further into insanity, so I don't feel as sure about that. The most interesting part of diagnosing Arthur comes later in the film, when it's revealed that he was both adopted and heavily abused as a child. Essentially, it suggested that most or all of his mental illnesses came from trauma, and not from genetics. Thus, when he comes to embrace those parts of himself as he goes Joker mode, it's less that he's accepting what he's always been, and more that he's accepting the role that society has forced upon him. This is one of the most important pieces to the puzzle that is Arthur, and it reinforces what the film has to say about people on the lower rungs of society. Arthur is, in every sense of the word, a product of his environment. And while he may be a very flawed person, his mental illness isn't the flaw, it's his own personality problems. On that note, it's about time we shift discussion to a broader lens, as the film doesn't just stop at fleshing out Arthur. It has a lot to say about its own world of Gotham City, and our own by extension. For starters, the film isn't shy when it comes to representing race in the context of class struggles. Arthur is one of the many white folks in poverty and in his tenement housing, but he's also among what could easily be a larger amount of black folks. The girl he becomes obsessed with is black, his social worker is black, which apparently matches up with the average demographic of social workers. The desk guy at Arkham Asylum is black. You know who isn't black? The 3 kids he shoots in the subway. The cops who hound him after his mother's hospitalized. Thomas Wayne and his immediate entourage. The film never puts it into literal words, but it doesn't need to. It knows who's more likely to be poor in inner city environments, and it knows that we know that too. A lesser film would have made one of the 3 trust fund kids black, or would have made one of the cops black, so as to avoid making a vague political statement, and it certainly would have put a more well-known white actress in as Arthur's imaginary love interest. The film also pulls no punches with its representation of Arthur's economic situation. He, of course, lives with and takes care of his mother, and his apartment is a complete wreck, to the point that a gunshot going off never results in any worry about eviction or even investigation. His job is thankless and puts him in active danger of harassment and assault. His boss is a gratuitous but pretty accurate representation of most bosses in low-skill job environments. The city's infrastructure is barely functional, social programs are being actively cut, yet when questioned about why the city's downtrodden would be frustrated with life, Thomas Wayne blames the poor for putting themselves in a bad situation. And while the less fortunate protest outside a gala hosted by Wayne, the city's elite relax inside and indulge in a vintage comedy about a working-class couple trying desperately to make it in the modern world. On that subject, you should absolutely watch Modern Times. It's one of the best films of the silent era and of Chaplin's whole catalog. Holy film student, Batman. Of course, one of the film's best aspects is its depiction of how Arthur lives with his mental illness. In public, he always has to mask to some extent, and he's more than capable of doing so. The film never paints him as some kind of eccentric outcast when he's successfully masking. It never gives the impression that you can just tell when people have mental illnesses, if they're hiding it. Granted, the mask will sometimes slip, but it's only in these moments where he falters that Arthur gets mocked or humiliated. For his mental illness, at least.
No one's laughing now. You can say that again, pal.
This is really like reaction you do. Wait, no. No. With his social worker, he has to maintain a socially acceptable tone and manner, and even with his mother, he has to act in ways that keep her happy. She refuses interaction with him if he's anything less than chipper. It's only in moments where he's truly alone that we get to see Arthur coping with stress, allowing himself to indulge in imagination, and generally not trying to police his mannerisms and quirks. The film says it best itself, and this is just one of the realest things I've ever seen a piece of mainstream media willing to say out loud. Another thing I'm especially happy about is how the film depicts violence, specifically Arthur's violent acts. There's about 10 moments of explicit on-screen violence in this 2-hour film, even fewer when you count lethal violence, and only half of those are committed by Arthur himself. It makes it clear that the world outside of Arthur is still as violent as he becomes, if not more so. There's also several instances in the film where Arthur actively restrains himself from violence, not just because of some vague worry about not being able to kill more people, but because he truly doesn't want to be that kind of person for most of the film. It reinforces that his violent acts aren't dragging some hidden propensity for murder out from under his skin. He's simply adapting to match the world's own violence towards him. Again, he has to adapt and change to survive his situation, and yet somehow it's his own fault when he fights back against a world that kicks him while he's down. Once again, I'd like to bring attention to Arthur's mental illness largely being caused by childhood trauma. Consider that this adopted child was tormented by a physically abusive boyfriend of his mother, who only adopted him to serve her delusions of bearing Thomas Wayne's child. The world has had it out for him from as early in his life as one could imagine, and it isn't even by failure of the genetic lottery that Arthur grew up in the life that he did. Indeed, Arthur's mother isn't a good person. Obviously, she adopted a baby to use as leverage to get money from a rich dude, but even in the rest of the film, she rarely, if ever, calls Arthur by his actual name, and doesn't even seem to be aware of his laughter condition. Happy?
Yeah, Mom.
My name is Joker. The film diagnoses her with delusional psychosis and narcissistic personality disorder, and that lines up pretty well with her actions and attitudes throughout the film. But even with that, like I said, Penny herself was dealing with the trauma delivered by her abusive boyfriend, and of all the people in this situation who came away with less, it sure seems like he got away without any scratches. As is often the case in real life, the man of the house is free to abandon the lives he ruined and find some new, younger woman to terrorize, while the mother and child desperately scramble to put together the pieces of their broken existence. As I hope I've made clear, despite being hijacked by the worst demographic on planet Earth, Joker has a lot of things to say about the lower class, and plenty more about how the systems in place are doing all in their power to ruin the lives of the destitute, the mentally ill, and especially those who fall under both categories. It has a lot to say about society, quite frankly. It just isn't capable of saying all those things without the caveat of being a comic book movie. And it's here that things truly fall apart.
I just hope my death makes more sense than my life.
I liked that one.
It's one of my
I
favorites.
didn't like that one, Joker. I mean, John, what's his name?
Arthur. Well, I didn't like that one, Joker.
How does it feel?
You think you're a real Joker, don't you?
Why does everyone keep saying that?
I don't get it. Granted, the film falters in moments before this, too. It's not perfect, nowhere near it. Todd Phillips is many things, but an art film director is not one of them. Several parts of the film's storytelling come off as stilted at best and try-hard at worst. A lot of Arthur's struggles feel very obviously pointed out, even as they're happening on screen, and the film's narrative in general relies on a significant number of setup-payoff moments. That silly headbanging thing comes back multiple times, and I can only assume it straight up means the amount of insane that Arthur is at any given moment. Easily the worst moment of shallow storytelling is the montage reveal that Arthur's relationship was entirely a delusion on his part, a thing that the film has less subjected, more screamed at us by this point. At several points it feels like the film is spoon-feeding its themes and imagery to the audience, but this is definitely as bad as it gets. I understand that this was a mainstream film, and the average moviegoer is going to need a guiding hand at times to pick up on certain things, but come on! This is going too far, and you know it. Not only that, it makes rewatches so tedious that I almost want to just put the film down forever and remember a better version in my head that didn't treat me like I'm stupid. On the other side of things, Arthur's delusions add a layer to this film that I feel it's prone to misusing. A non-literal narrative is fine, but this film clearly isn't operating on that level, at least not all the time. The scene where Arthur imagines himself on the Murray Franklin show is basically perfect for showing his mental illness, the way his worldview is shaped by how his mother raised him, and his desperate need for approval and a father figure. But other scenes, like the part right before he kills the three dudes where they're all singing about clowns, that part feels like Arthur imagined all or some of it, because it's downright ludicrous and doesn't fit with the established tone in the outside world. But the film never comes out and acknowledges that. It only calls back to it when Arthur's on the Murray Franklin show, and that does very little to clear up the ambiguity of it all. There's not a lot of moments like that where the tone or logic feels directly at odds with the movie itself, but it happens enough times to make me wonder if it was originally supposed to lean more into Arthur's delusions, and not tell the viewer straight up when things were literal or otherwise. The movie's also strange about how it handles the political side of Arthur's journey, with him specifically. On the one hand, in typical society man fashion, he doesn't care at all about the political implications of himself or his actions. He only wants to better his own situation in the world. However, the film makes it plain that the world cares about what he's doing. On the one hand, this response comes mostly from witness testimony saying a man dressed as a clown killed the kids, as well as Thomas Wayne saying that anyone who would do or support such a thing is a clown. But on the other hand, it seems really odd that so many people would be in favor of killing random rich people. It is, if nothing else, an insanely radical belief. Discounting that, there's some pretty on-the-nose protest scenes, and the slogan "Kill the Rich" is once again insanely try-hard for a film like this. Beyond those things, though, the film doesn't do much with its politics. Which is fine, make a character study if that's what you want to make, but the attempt to include these elements in the first place comes off as either a bigger part of the film that was scrapped, or an empty gesture to include the contemporary US political climate, which was BLM protests. I really hope it isn't that. That would really sour my opinion of this film. All that said, if nothing else, Phillips can make a mean comedy. I mean, it's in his catalog, you'd hope that he could do that much. The moments of humor that dot the film's runtime are welcome dilutions to all the misery, and this film is especially in need of levity. I don't know. I was talking about the Silent Hill 2 putting us through the ringer. If they're trying to be funny, this might be the first one. I forgot this film is just kind of a depressing romp for like the first hour and 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Not because it's too edgy, necessarily, more so because its subject is so dark and so aggressively shoved in the audience's face, for better and worse. Even on their own, these humorous moments are very funny, both in writing and timing. Strangely enough, though, Arthur himself isn't that funny. It's part of the plot that he's got a horrible sense of humor and timing, and he can't read a room for crap. It reinforces the sense of entitlement he possesses, that he thinks he can just be a comedian without trying. But in terms of being a movie about the Joker, it doesn't really make sense to strip away his key defining element, but keep the film itself partially humorous in tone. But we both know I'm beating around the bush. We all know the worst part of this film, and I haven't got much to add to it besides my voice being the one to say, yes, the whole Bruce Wayne subplot is terrible. The fact that it's even here at all reeks of studio interference. I don't think the film Phillips was trying to make was inherently a Joker film, as the entire Joker identity is stretched over the film like an ill-fitting mask. The worst parts are all of the trailer scenes, or more specifically, everything after Arthur goes Joker mode. The Murray Franklin show scene is downright laughable with its writing, and not in a good way. Even Joaquin Phoenix's performances in this scene and in the scene where he stabs Randall border on edgy 15-year-old levels of angst.
What's with the makeup then?
My mom died. Celebrating.
We heard.
Right?
That's why we came by. Figured,
I don't even need to elaborate on the Bruce Wayne thing. I can mention it. You know exactly what I'm talking about. You know that they shoved in the stupid fucking Batman origin scene that's in every single Batman movie, and it sucks. There's nothing else to say about it. It just sucks. Thomas Wayne, how are you not dead yet? Why did you go to the theater on the night of the riot? See, this part doesn't make sense either. Do the pearl thing. Yeah! I imagine things like this are where the most unbearable of Joker fanboys got sucked in, because earnestly written and acted scenes of a man struggling against the system while managing his mental illness certainly wouldn't have done much for the sort of person who counters depression with just be happy. I'd go so far as to say that a lot of this movie comes off to people like that as making Arthur seem creepy or unhinged, even before he actually breaks. I get seeing it that way on some level, but things like the bathroom dance and the fridge scene come off to me as coping with stress rather than capping off a murder with acting vaguely insane for the camera. But you know the worst part of it all? It's that I think there's actually a better movie in here somewhere. Like I said, the political stuff could easily have been expanded upon. Just cut out all of the Bruce Wayne shit and make room for that. And not only that, but the later scenes where he goes Joker mode could have been toned down a lot so as to better fit with Arthur's personality, instead of stretching him to conform to a Joker identity. Midway through the film, Arthur says to his social worker that he overheard a song called My Name is Carnival at work, and that it spoke to him because his clown name is Carnival. Did you know that? I sure didn't. It's never mentioned at any other point in the movie, to my knowledge. But doesn't this instantly suggest the idea of a better movie called Carnival? It instantly works way better, in my opinion. And it could be used to talk about more than just Arthur. You know, he's Carnival, but also the city is full of clowns, according to the wealthy, and society itself is a carnival because of how inherently illogical so much of it is. Ringleaders, sideshow attractions, rickety old roller coasters, and a dead body hidden between the tents. That's the movie I imagine when I hear the name Carnival, and that's the film that I see during so much of this movie. But then Joker comes on screen and does the Joker laugh, and I'm like, oh yeah, it's the Joker movie. Batman. Ooh. I can only hope Todd Phillips is able to take the vision he began here and actually create an original idea and property with this kind of passion. Yeah, this is the part of the video where I force in talking about the sequel. A sequel to this movie was never going to go well. And given the things I've heard about it, it doesn't sound like Phillips was able to bring much to the table besides a resentment for all the Sigma male losers that misunderstood the first film. That said, if the best parts of this movie are an example of what he could do when not having to abide by the whims of a greater studio, I'd love to see an unhampered piece of art with him at the helm. It doesn't have to be perfect, even great, really. I just want it to be consistent, coherent, and personal. That's all I want out of any good film. As for Joker, it gets 2 of 3. But it easily could have had all of them. Thank you very much for watching. As usual, there's plenty I didn't talk about in this video, and I encourage everyone to bring their piece to the comment section. It does me good to read so many different perspectives, and it does the channel good to get the engagement, of course. Once again, this video comes to you from a comment. Not an outright recommendation like the last one, but something that sparked my curiosity. So rest assured, you don't need to ask me to watch a film for me to watch it. This is how my watch list works in the first place. I see or hear a film mentioned somewhere, but I watch it eventually. Granted, I've seen Joker before, so it sort of goes against my rules, but if the first few months of doing this have taught me anything, it's that I can't force myself to play this game by rules I haven't tested yet. Also, I haven't seen Joker since seeing it in theaters, so yeah, I think it works out for this. But yeah, that's Joker. And that's the second episode of A Month a Movie. Stay tuned to see if I get one out for November, I guess. I hope you have a good day. Take care of yourself.